Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Monday, December 10th, and I'm doing a video on lunar tracking. This is part 2 of the lunar tracking video series that I'm doing. You can check out the first one a couple of weeks ago on my YouTube feed and give you some useful insights about tracking the moon. The basic reason for doing this series is that there's really no better way of learning predictive astrology or how to do daily or monthly or weekly forecasts, or even if you're learning horary astrology. The moon is the basic prognosticator. It's the main object in the sky whose movements show us the basic flow of events and what kinds of things are likely to happen. It was as early as the Hellenistic astrologers, we have people saying that the course of the moon takes is in relation to the fortune of all. That means it refers to the general comings and goings, the general changes that we see, whether it's in our bodies, our families, our day-to-day, the work, the city, the news. As the moon goes, so everything goes. It was considered to be the lowest sphere of the heavenly spheres, right between the earthly sphere and the rest of the heavenly spheres of the planets. And as such, it was also a reflective sort of dish that gathered and collected all of the effluences of the planets and then disseminated them through the elemental spheres and into the earthly sphere, where they would then produce all of the changes that we experience. So the moon is really the kind of medium through which all of the celestial lights were thought to sort of pour into Earth. So that's a beautiful way of thinking about the moon. And it's one of the main reasons that we pay so much attention to the moon in terms of daily forecasting. So when I first got started, for example, writing daily content back in like 2011, every day I kept a moon journal. And I talked about this in video 1, I think. The moon journal is a simple way of keeping track of where the moon is heading and what aspects it's making with other planets, and then what that ends up looking like in your day-to-day life. When you kind of account for the changes in the moon and how they sync up with different things happening in your life, you start developing basically like your palate for the heavenly buffet. You start recognizing what a Moon-Venus transit tastes like or feels like or looks like. And as you differentiate your astrological palette, so to speak, you become more sophisticated in what you're able to say about what may or may not happen in the course of a day. Remembering again that so much of what's happening around us is not due simply to the choices that we make, but to the choices that we make in combination with a great deal of other environmental factors, energies, as some people say. So tracking the moon, really, really basic and important. Now, this video may be over some of your heads if you're out there and you're kind of listening to this and you're going, some of this might be sort of technically above where you're at. That's okay too. What you have to know for lunar tracking to really make sense is you have to have some daily astrological calculating program. For example, you can get really great program that I use on my cell phone is called Astro Gold. Definitely can't see it. But Astro Gold is a nice app. If you have, I have, what is this? It's Galaxy. So, and I believe that Time Passages is available for iPhones. And I think they're both like $20 apps or something like that, maybe even less. But those are really nice because you can always track the current transits. There's some free programs online as well. If you just basically do a Google search for daily astrological transits, if you go to Astro Dean Store, there's a lot of websites, and you do a basic Google search for daily astrological transits, and you'll find an unending amount of information out there that can help you see where the moon is at any given moment, and a chart of where everything is flowing. Now, you also have to know aspects to make this meaningful, meaning you have to know the difference between a sextile and a trine, or a square and an opposition. If you don't know how to track that yet, this video may be a little beyond where you're at already. So at some point, maybe I'll do something that's even more sort of super beginner. But for those who are sort of like hobby students of astrology, this should be something that's really helpful. All right, so Here's what I do to get the maximum results out of lunar tracking and to have lunar tracking really do what it's meant to do, which is to, again, teach you how to be a better forecaster or how to recognize the flow of events. And with a better understanding of the flow of events, and you're paying attention to them a lot, you start developing something of an intuitive clock. There's two types of time in sort of ancient Greek philosophy. There's chronos and kairos. Chronos is sort of like, you know, the hands on a clock. It's the objective time. It's 5:39 p.m. as I'm making this today, right? Kairos is a bit more like, well, when is the right time? You know, how some entrepreneurs, for example, how do they know exactly when to kick off a new business or to invest or to you know, make it an important announcement? You know, sometimes that's really what astrology boils down to, is people asking when is the best time to do something. There's a whole field or a branch of astrology called electional astrology, which has to do with trying to understand the best time to do something. Well, this is not so much about electional astrology, but it is about developing an inner and more intuitive sense of when it's the right time to do something, when it's the right time to say something and when it's not, when things are likely to be more triggery and when they're not. Okay, so lunar tracking, if you do it regularly, and if you do it in the way that I'm about to show you, I think, will help you to develop more of that intuitive sense of timing, which is a great gift to have in life. And it also, generally speaking, makes you a little bit better at doing predictive work in astrology. So let me get into it now and show you. Here are a few rules to think about, okay? The number one rule for me for lunar tracking is to make the practice one that is mostly done in hindsight, which means don't think about it while you're in it. So for example, I knew that I was going to be doing a lunar tracking, something on lunar tracking after the weekend was over, because I was going to pay extra special attention to where the moon was going every single day, a little bit more than I normally would, because I wanted to make this video. But knowing that I was going to do that, I specifically said to myself, okay, all I need to do is make mental note and maybe even jot down when remarkable things happen or when something happened that sort of stands out from the rest of the flow of events between Thursday and Sunday over the course of the weekend. And I'm not paying attention. In fact, I'm almost trying to forget where the moon is at. Okay, like that. Then what I'm doing after the whole weekend is done is I'm going back through each aspect that the moon made. And I'm seeing as it closed in on the aspect were any of those notable events lined up. And I, without fail, will find that they are, that there's incredible sort of synchronization between the events that stand out emotionally or just circumstantially, that are inner or outer, that are lined up with fundamental symbolic aspects or important moments in the lunar cycle, in the lunar movements. So what's the first rule again? Try to do it in hindsight and don't think about it while you're doing it. Just set up a time frame, say between this day and this day. Keep it short in the beginning because you don't want to have too many events spread out over too long. It'll be hard to remember them. Pick a 3-day window or even a 2-day window and just get into your flow. Try to forget about the fact that you're doing anything because it has a weird way of disrupting this process. Now, in time, if you keep doing this, your ability to kind of know where things are at while they're happening will start to naturally arise within you. That's the end result. But it's not the thing, because you're trying to develop an intuitive sense of lunar timing. Oh, the moon must be making an aspect right now. I can feel it. Things are kind of happening. I wonder what it is. Go check it. You say, oh, that's interesting. There's a moon-Venus contact or something like that. But to get to that place of intuitive timing, you have to specifically set yourself up again for 2 or 3 days of saying, okay, I'm going to lunar track. I'm going to chart out all the aspects and see what was happening. But I'm going to do so after the fact. For the next couple of days, I'm not looking at the moon. I'm not looking where it's at. I'm just going to go through these events and then just take note when something stands out. Now, if you're someone who's, really dramatic and things are standing out all the time, might be a little bit more difficult. Try to pare it down to the most, the most prominent events, basically. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how this works from my weekend. I'm going to show you what I did. So over the weekend, starting on Thursday, I had a good friend of mine who came into town. He came into town late in the afternoon. It was a balsamic moon on Thursday. Moon was in Sagittarius, as you can see here in this chart. Now, the houses don't matter here. I'm just trying to show you the planets, where they're at. It doesn't matter which house system I'm using. I'm not paying really any attention to the houses whatsoever, just tracking the moon. Balsamic moon, late dark moon in Sagittarius. Now, there's two ways of doing this. When you look back, you can look at just the planets and just the planetary contacts. That's like the simplest level. The second and a slightly more complicated level would be to look at where they land in your birth chart. Okay, so for example, I can look at a late dark balsamic moon making a square to Mars and Neptune, right? This is what was happening this is the aspect from the moon that was applying, meaning it was moving to complete this by 10:30 at night. But this was the aspect that was applying within 8 degrees, is a good measurement for the moon. It was applying late afternoon when I picked my friend up from the airport. Right before I picked him up from the airport, I got word that an astrological teacher of mine had died. I knew that he was probably going to pass over, but it was nonetheless difficult news. So right away, what do I see? I see the moon, a dark balsamic moon in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a Jupiter-ruled sign. And this is Jupiter, the planet of teachers. And so we have a dark moon in the sign of Jupiter. And I got the news about a death. That's a very dark moon kind of thing, of a teacher in Sagittarius. Meanwhile, the difficult news came, and for the rest of the evening with my friend, I went on to process the information, and it was emotionally challenging. There you have the new moon with a square to Mars and Neptune in Pisces. It was emotional and challenging. He was very helpful, helped me process it. So that was the first way that this experience started. Again, not paying attention to it deliberately. So, of course, at this point, I have to be honest and say I knew where things were at as soon as I got the news, because I do look at transits every single day, and I've been doing this for years and years and years. So, all right. So, but going forward from there, moon, I'm not going to take into considerations aspects that are happening while I'm sleeping, right? So you'll see, for example, that during the evening hours, about 4 in the morning or so, the moon makes a trine to Uranus, for example. Well, I'm sleeping, and there's nothing to report on during that time unless I'm tracking my dreams, but I didn't remember my dreams or anything like that. So sometimes it's like that. You have to be kind of careful when you're sleeping, because it doesn't always come through when you're sleeping as well. So I have noticed dreams can be really affected, but at any rate, so morning comes around. See, it's December 8th, Saturday. Whoops, did I skip through Friday? I think I did. So Thursday night was okay, yeah. So Friday, here's my Friday account. Friday, the moon is void of course, right? For most of the day. I don't count outer planets in the void of course signature. That's part of my own thing. Some people would definitely count outer planets in void of course moon, but moon's not making contact with any planets that are visible, right? Uranus is not visible to the naked eye. So I don't count that. And it was more of a lull kind of day, continuing in the wake of the themes that had started the night before, Thursday night, and Thursday at late afternoon, which was the death of this astrologer. But what evolved on Friday, which I actually talked about in my horoscopes a couple of, I guess it was a week or so ago, I talked about the theme of newness, and how even though there's a kind of a heavier feeling in the air, that there's a feeling of newness that comes with it. And so on Friday, it was definitely a day hanging out with my friend where, trying to turn the page. And there was a sense of relief. And like, I don't know if you've ever had someone that you're close with die. There's a mixture of this sense of remembering everything that's really important and kind of feeling renewed, but also feeling the loss. So that's kind of how I was feeling on Friday. Not a lot of aspects happening. And then the Uranus trine happens during the night. Okay, so Saturday. Here's where it really got interesting. So Saturday, moon goes into Capricorn, right? This is so funny. So Saturday morning, as the moon goes into Capricorn, my friend and I start watching documentaries on Netflix in the morning while eating our like oatmeal or whatever. We start watching documentaries on Netflix about mountain climbers. I hadn't thought about this at all. Of course, there's the moon in Capricorn, the mountain goat, the sea goat, but it's the Capricorn personality obviously is often very much about scaling mountains, sort of ascending in and trying to achieve difficult things. So we started off, and the day was like very much about, we started talking about how interesting these kinds of people are and the accomplishments and whatever. All right, so moon comes into a sextile with Venus. And right as it comes into a sextile with Venus, right, Moon-Venus connection, someone showed up at our house to inspect and clean and also inspect our gutters. So there's the moon in Capricorn and Venus in Scorpio. Venus rules cleanliness. Scorpio rules that deep, dark, watery stuff, and possibly things that clog or get stuck in pipes or filtration systems or things like that. So, and of course, the moon in Capricorn is the repair, the house, checking to make sure things are structurally sound. So, a gutter repair person showed up as the moon was making a sextile with Venus and Scorpio. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so then you go along from there, and as the day progressed, oh, I almost forgot. I got to go back a second to Friday. This is so cool. I can't believe I forgot this. So remember I was saying Friday was kind of a new moon feeling. It was still like kind of feeling this sense of having turned the page, and it was lingering in that new moon space. The moon was void, of course. It's lingering in this new moon space, and I said there's this feeling of turning over a new page after a loss and after something dark. With my astrology teacher, one of my astrology teachers, someone that I consider a teacher, having died. So there was this renewal feeling as well. Well, we ended up going to see a theater performance in the evening of A Christmas Carol, which happens to be about someone that gets a new lease on life after an experience with three ghosts, and particularly dark ghosts of Christmas future at the very end, of course, Ebenezer Scrooge, right? So, and we got a tour of Ford Theater in DC. I live in DC. I've never been to Ford Theater to see this before, but we got a tour of the Lincoln Museum and all of the paraphernalia, including the very gun that assassinated him. And of course, that's where he was killed, was in the Ford Theater. So we were, of course, playing on the same themes of death, the death of a leader, the death of a teacher, the death of a king, of a president. That's the dark moon in Sag, but then the new moon turning the corner into this kind of revitalizing, renewing. So we ended up seeing A Christmas Carol in Ford's Theater, right? Isn't that like amazing? I can't believe that's what I was like, something on Friday. But at any rate, that it still had that kind of new moon feeling of like this kind of new beginning in the wake of darkness. It was a very easygoing day. Not a lot really happened. I mean, it was very, very mellow. Okay, so at any rate, going back to Saturday now, sorry to jump around. If you go back to on Saturday, after the gutter inspector came with the moon sextile Venus in Scorpio, then as the day progresses, okay, in the evening time, as the moon is also just separating, just sort of flowing forth from, I guess it was about 5 o'clock. It's just still in the sextile with Venus. Moon Venus is also a sextile, would typically mean potentially friends or groups of people. So friends and groups of people, because the moon is family, is groups, is representative of the many. Venus is also friendship and groups. So moon sextile Venus, we got together with a group of friends and did some kirtan and some singing at our yoga studio, right? Okay, and then right afterward, my friend and I, as the moon is moving in now to conjoin with Saturn in Capricorn, right? By later in the evening, we went to a late show about this guy who's really famous for free solo climbing, massive rock faces without ropes. So we kept up. We came back to the whole rock climbing theme, and it was a very interesting documentary called Free Solo. Check it out; it's really really cool. But it provoked all these really deep conversations about mountains and about achievement and all this stuff. And I ended up writing my horoscope on Sunday about that experience. But that's happening as the moon is conjoining with Saturn, right, in Capricorn again. So, okay, so that was a notable event there. Then go forward, and if you go forward to Sunday, here we are. So on Sunday, so on Sunday, as the moon is now getting, you'll see, here we go. As the moon is moving into a sextile with Neptune, right? This is Sunday morning that this is happening. We're leaving our house, all of us, and going to our yoga studio again to have a little birthday party for my daughter. And this birthday party was, we had a musical performance from a bluegrass banjo player. He's a really nice guy. He's a friend of ours, and he did bluegrass music. So, and the event was it was very magical. If you've ever been to like a really little kid's birthday and there's just like little kids everywhere, it was very magical. And it was also really funny because all the kids were getting like sort of wasted on sugar, right? Which is kind of our fault because we sort of provided we provided the goods, right? But it was this really funny thing where I think a lot of the parents were kind of like vacillating between trying to set good boundaries and then sort of wanting to let everyone go with just picking out on cake and having fun. So it was another very community-oriented event, but Moon Neptune sextile from Capricorn to Pisces. There was music, there was magic, there was little kids, there was lots of sugar, and then there was a sort of back and forth about boundaries and rules and parenting around sugar. So I thought of that as very Moon Neptune. But anyway, maybe even more accurate, you could say, from kind of a predictive perspective or a match between Moon and Neptune, is that right afterward, my wife took the kids home and my friend is still visiting. So we went to this place that's not far from where I live, which is like a Korean bathhouse. So there's like lots of saunas and stuff like that. So then we went, my friend and I, to a place where you can sit in saunas. So the moon is now making a sextile to Mars and Neptune in Pisces, water signs. And yeah, and we were laughing because if you've ever been to a bathhouse before, like a place where there's lots of nudity, there's separate for men and women are separated, but it's like, you know, there's lots of people just walking around naked in this place, and you're there obviously to relax. But it's also like sometimes for certain, you know, for some people, it's difficult to relax because, you know, everyone has an ego and it's already enough to go to a gym and have to deal with people or whatever, you know. But when you're going to a bathhouse or whatever, that kind of place, you know, dealing with people's egos when they're also just like buck naked is like such an experience. So this was like such a another funny like Capricorn Pisces kind of moment where there was like, you know, just issues about boundary and privacy and and also like, a place that was very, what can I say? Like watery. Like these are like, pools, spa, the hot tubs, the saunas, like the whole thing. So my friend and I are sitting there talking in the saunas and like, catching up or whatever. And it was just sort of this weird, comical, mystical, otherworldly scene that was also kind of a thing again about boundaries and lack of boundaries. And so, anyway, it would have been you could get some really great sketch comedy out of our journey there. All right. So then press on later in the day, in the evening, and look at what happens here. Moon gets into a conjunction with Pluto, right? Later in the evening, my friend and I get into a very deep and very long conversation about our families and family karma. How's your folks doing? How are your folks doing? How are your siblings doing? How are your siblings doing? So I've been friends with this guy. This is one of my best friends since the second grade. So catching up over the years, whenever we hang out, it's like I know everyone in his family since I was a little kid, So there's a lot to catch up on, and it's a lot to talk about, to chronicle these changes over decades and decades of being friends. So Moon Pluto, we were like going into these very deep, intense spaces, like really exploring sort of family karma. And it was very cleansing and sort of purgative. And we were doing it over dinner right after, basically throughout the evening, but right after going to the spa. So it was a very cleansing kind of purgative experience that was also being blended in there. All right. So I'm sure my life is not that interesting to all of you, but the point of all of this is that you too can do exactly what I did. So was I sitting there, like looking at my phone or checking online and being like, okay, the moon's making a thing to Pluto, like let's talk about deep family stuff? Or no, I didn't I totally just let go of it. And then coming back to it and looking hour by hour at where the moon was going and what contacts it was making. These are the things that I was able to put together. Now, of course, plugging in the houses is very interesting too. For example, Sagittarius happens to be my 8th whole sign house. So that Balsamic Moon is happening in the house of death in my chart. That Capricorn moon in the 9th house all throughout the weekend, house of religion. I have a moon in Capricorn in the 9th house, so natural for me to get into family karma there. Grew up a preacher's kid, so talking about the church, talking about family stuff. So it was and then also like talking about a lot of Capricorn stuff, mountain climbing, all just. It was in my moon, my natural, that's my moon sign is Capricorn, right? So, and a lot of what happened over the weekend took place in relation to foreign countries or foreign cultures as well. There's, spending a huge amount of time on Sunday in a Korean bathhouse. If I remember, it's Korean bathhouse, but it might be another. Oh, I'm trying to remember. I think it was Korean, but at any rate, so a number of other times during the weekend, the conversations were either about religion or astrology or foreign countries or, really a lot of 9th house stuff. So you can also plug in other words, everything that you're tracking into your natal chart and look at how the houses come into play as well. What are the benefits of doing this? Again, it's really simple. If you do this enough and you do it in the way that I'm kind of describing it, my experience anyway has been that you will start developing a kind of inner timer that starts like, something's happening. And you'll start to notice when astrological like themed events are starting to occur. So let's go up to the very present moment, for example, and look at what's happening right now. Not planned at all. I'm just saying, hey, I literally am looking right now. What do I see? I see the moon and Mercury. Here's an explanatory little class on the moon and moon tracking that I'm doing right as the moon is separating from a sextile with Mercury. So technical explanation, storytelling, interpretations, etc. And why am I telling all of us to do this? Ultimately, it's because the greatest spiritual benefit that we get from astrology is being able to use that sense, that inner sense of timing, to notice, a lot of the times when I think I'm in control of everything, I'm actually kind of floating through these experiences. And the sky is just mirroring that, like, yeah, you're floating through your experiences, because guess what? You're not just this body. You're not just your actions in this body or this lifetime. In some ways, the material stuff that we do is not really where our real freedom is located. The choices that we make in the material world, though meaningful, are in some ways also very predictable. And so a lot of the times what we think of as freely determining our lives, astrology is constantly telling us, like, actually we're getting pulled along by forces that we really pretend to understand a lot of the time. And when you start to notice this and you get that internal timer, that's when you're in the midst of a conversation with, like, let's say you're at that birthday party and a parent is starting to freak out about the sugar a little bit. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I want my kid having sugar or something like that. You could intuitively, you could say, oh yeah, Mars. Oh, let's see. Moon is in a sextile with Mars and Neptune in Pisces. It's in Capricorn. Yeah, that makes sense that this person would be saying that right now. And rather than getting into a power struggle because you're getting defensive about, like, well, I brought the cake and it must be my fault. They must think I'm a bad parent, or, whatever else you might get in your head about, you can just instantly have a moment of being like, wow, yeah, we're all in this moment. We're all in this moment together, aren't we? And I think it can just change how we approach and how we move through things. Most of where our freedom lies is in how we respond to things that are happening as they're actually unfolding. A lot of the times we get involved with these things like, death of a teacher, and then being at the Ford's Theater and seeing Lincoln's, assassin's gun, and seeing the Christmas play Scrooge, and you get involved in all of it. And it becomes an opportunity for you to step back and remember that you're literally moving through eternity right now. And that everything that you think is at stake in your life, it helps you remember that it's in this world, it's a part of a never-ending dance of these cyclically recurring patterns. Beautiful to start seeing the patterns, and you don't place the same pressures on yourself, and you don't get swept up in everything that's happening in the same way. You have a little bit more reflective distance, and reflective distance and differentiation is the core way that a meaningful relationship is established. The difference between a codependent relationship and a beautiful, healthy one is that both people have a healthy sense of themselves as separate and as each other as separate. And and I'd like to think, spiritually speaking, as eternal beings. Well, what to speak of the world when we look and we see all of these events and experiences, and we don't have to invest so much of our personal happiness in the way that everything's unfolding. Get a little bit of distance. That distance also helps us to have a more meaningful relationship with everything in the world. And it helps build in a sense of timing, when it's right to, go deeper and when it isn't. Like, sometimes I would never think to go so deep with someone talking about family karma. I say to myself, oh, the moon's conjoining with Pluto. It feels like this is the time to go there. But then on the other hand, you might be with someone and so moon's going with Pluto. This is not the time to go there. Right? So these kinds of dynamics also tip us off about how to stay in our center, how to not get sucked into things, because this is like a grand Shakespearean play that's going on. And we have some choice about how we're going to play the role that we've been given. There is some flexibility here, but most of it is built into being able to understand the nature of changes and the nature of the unfolding of destiny, and the way in which the material patterns and the recurring of these patterns are happening. So I hope that this was interesting for everyone. It gives you some good stuff to chew on. This has been part 2 of your Tracking the Moon series. And if I have more insights or more examples like this, I'll do another one in the future. All right, so if you have questions or feedback, or you do this yourself and want to share the results, please do. Don't send me a huge long email. Post it on YouTube or something so that we can all read it. I hope you have a good experience with some lunar tracking. Okay, take care. Bye.